Right now, 97% of people trying to break a bad habit are doing it completely wrong. And here's the shocking part. The harder they try, the worse it gets. This is not a motivational guess. This comes from a 2019 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, where researchers tracked over 3,000 participants attempting to change unwanted behaviors. The findings were devastating. Nearly all of them relied on the same strategy: willpower, and nearly all of them failed within 6 weeks. You have probably been there yourself. You wake up one morning, disgusted with some behavior you cannot seem to shake. Maybe it is the mindless scrolling that steals your evenings. Maybe it is the stress eating that sabotages your health. Maybe it is procrastination that keeps you stuck in the same position year after year. And you make a decision. You say the words, "This time will be different. This time I am serious." For a few days, maybe even a few weeks, things actually change. You feel powerful. You feel in control. You start believing that all you ever needed was enough motivation, enough commitment, enough willpower. And then something happens. A stressful day at work, a conflict with someone you care about, a sleepless night. And before you even realize what is happening, you are right back where you started. Scrolling, eating, procrastinating, doing the exact thing you swore you would never do again. What comes next is almost worse than the habit itself. The guilt, the shame, the voice in your head that says, "What is wrong with you? Why can't you just stop?" Here is what I need you to understand. Nothing is wrong with you. Absolutely nothing. The problem is not your character. The problem is not your commitment. The problem is not your willpower. The problem is that you have been lied to. You have been told your entire life that breaking bad habits is about trying harder, about wanting it more, about mustering enough self-control to white-knuckle your way through temptation. That advice is not just unhelpful, it is neurologically backwards. Let me explain what is actually happening inside your skull when you try to break a habit using willpower alone. Your brain has two systems that are constantly competing for control of your behavior. The first system lives in your prefrontal cortex. This is the region right behind your forehead. It handles conscious decision-making, planning, and impulse control. When you decide to skip dessert or put your phone away, that is your prefrontal cortex at work. Think of it as your brain's CEO. The second system operates in a deeper, older structure called the basal ganglia. This region is responsible for automatic behaviors, habits, routines, the actions you perform without thinking. When you drive home and realize you do not remember the last 10 minutes, that is your basal ganglia running the show. Think of it as your brain's autopilot. Now here is the critical insight that changes everything. Your prefrontal cortex, your willpower center, runs on a limited energy supply. Research from the University of Toronto found that the prefrontal cortex becomes measurably less active after just 45 minutes of demanding cognitive work. It gets tired. It gets depleted. It needs rest. But your basal ganglia? It never gets tired. It runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without any drop in performance. It operates on pure pattern recognition and repetition. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Your bad habits live in the basal ganglia. So when you try to break a habit using willpower, here is what you are actually doing. You are asking your exhaustible CEO to fight a battle against an inexhaustible autopilot. You are asking a system that depletes with every decision to overpower a system that never weakens. This is not a fair fight. This is not even a close fight. In the long run, the basal ganglia always wins. A 2012 study from Florida State University demonstrated this perfectly. Researchers gave participants tasks designed to drain their willpower. Things like resisting fresh-baked cookies or suppressing emotional reactions to disturbing images. Then they offered those same participants a chance to indulge in a bad habit. The results were predictable. The people with depleted willpower were 67% more likely to give in. Your willpower is not weak. It is simply finite. And you have been trying to fight an infinite war with finite ammunition. Let me show you how this plays out in real life. Think about when most people break their habits. Is it in the morning, when they are fresh and rested? Almost never. It is at night, after a long day, after dozens of decisions have already drained their prefrontal cortex. After stress has flooded their system with cortisol, that is when the basal ganglia takes over. That is when autopilot kicks in. That is when you find yourself doing the exact thing you promised yourself you would not do. This is not a failure of character. This is basic neuroscience. The average person makes approximately 35,000 decisions per day. Every single one of those decisions draws from your prefrontal cortex. By the time evening arrives, you are operating on fumes. And your basal ganglia, the home of your habits, has been patiently waiting all day for exactly this moment. Average people say, "I just need more discipline." The top 1% say, "I need to stop relying on discipline altogether." That is the fundamental difference. Elite performers understand that willpower is a tool for emergencies, not for daily operations. They do not build their lives around resisting temptation. They build their lives so that temptation rarely appears in the first place. Average people wake up every morning ready to battle their habits. Elite performers wake up in environments where the battle is already won. This distinction changes everything. Because once you understand that willpower is not the solution, a completely different approach becomes available. An approach that works with your brain instead of against it. An approach that recruits the basal ganglia as an ally rather than fighting it as an enemy. You have been trying to defeat your autopilot. What if you could reprogram it instead? You have been trying to resist the habit loop. What if you could hijack it? You have been trying to overpower your brain's reward system. What if you could redesign it? This is not theory. This is applied neuroscience. And over the next 9 chapters, you are going to learn exactly how to do it. You will discover the 4-part mechanism that drives every habit and how to interrupt it at each stage. You will learn to audit your dopamine sources and identify which ones are serving you and which ones are sabotaging you. You will map your personal triggers with surgical precision. You will design your environment so that good choices become effortless and bad choices become difficult. You will shift your identity at the neurological level, transforming from someone who is trying to quit into someone who simply does not engage in that behavior. And perhaps most importantly, you will learn what to do when you fail. Because you will fail. Everyone does. The difference between people who break free and people who stay trapped is not whether they stumble. It is what happens in the 60 seconds after they stumble. But all of that starts with accepting one uncomfortable truth. The willpower approach does not work. It has never worked. And continuing to rely on it is like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. You might make progress for a while, but the tide always comes back. You are not here because you lack discipline. You are here because you have been given the wrong tools. In the next chapter, you will discover the invisible machine that has been running in your brain your entire life. It operates without your permission. It shapes your behavior without your awareness. And until you understand exactly how it works, you will remain its prisoner. The habit loop is about to be decoded. Chapter 2: The Habit Loop Decoded. There is a 4-part machine running in your brain right now. It operates without your permission. It shapes your decisions without your awareness. And until you understand how it works, you will never break free from the behaviors that are holding you back. This machine is called the habit loop, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. In the early 1990s, a team of researchers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology made a discovery that would change everything we know about human behavior. Led by Dr. Graybiel, they were studying the basal ganglia, that ancient brain structure I mentioned in Chapter 1. What they found was remarkable. They placed rats in a simple T-shaped maze. At one end of the maze, behind a partition, was a piece of chocolate. When the partition lifted, a loud click sounded, and the rat could explore the maze to find the reward. At first, each rat wandered aimlessly. It would sniff the walls, scratch at corners, and eventually stumble upon the chocolate by accident. During this exploration phase, the rat's brain was extremely active. Neurons were firing everywhere. The brain was working hard to process all the new information. But here is where it gets interesting. After just a few days of repetition, something shifted. The rats stopped exploring. The moment they heard the click, they ran directly to the chocolate. No hesitation, no sniffing, no wasted movement. Pure automatic execution. And when the researchers looked at the brain activity during this automatic phase, they found something stunning. The brain had gone quiet, almost completely quiet. The only spikes of activity occurred at two moments: when the clicks sounded at the beginning, and when the rat tasted the chocolate at the end. Everything in between had been handed off to the basal ganglia. The entire sequence of behaviors had been chunked into a single automatic routine. This is the habit loop in action, and your brain operates the exact same way. Every habit you have, whether it is checking your phone, biting your nails, pouring a drink after work, or reaching for a cigarette, follows the same four-part structure. Miss any part, and you cannot change the behavior. Understand all four, and you hold the keys to transformation. Part 1 is the cue. The cue is the trigger that tells your brain to initiate the automatic routine. It is the click in the rat experiment. In your life, cues come in 5 categories: time of day, location, emotional state, other people, or a preceding action that just occurred. When you feel the urge to scroll social media, something triggered that urge. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was the sight of your phone on the desk. Maybe it was the uncomfortable silence after finishing a task. That trigger is the cue, and without identifying it, you are fighting blind. Part 2 is the craving. This is where most people get confused. The craving is not the desire for the habit itself. It is the desire for the reward the habit delivers. You do not crave the cigarette. You crave the relief from stress the cigarette provides. You do not crave the social media scroll. You crave the escape from boredom it offers. You do not crave the junk food. You crave the comfort it temporarily creates. This distinction matters enormously, because when you understand what you are actually craving, you can find alternative ways to satisfy that craving, ways that do not come with the negative consequences. A 2016 study from the University of Southern California examined over 200 people struggling with snacking habits. The researchers found that those who correctly identified the underlying craving behind their snacking were 3 times more likely to change the behavior than those who focused only on the snack itself. You must look beneath the surface. The habit is never really about the habit. It is about what the habit gives you. Part 3 is the response. This is the actual behavior: the scroll, the bite, the smoke, the drink, the procrastination. This is the part you see. This is the part you hate. This is the part you have been trying to stop through sheer willpower. But here's the problem. By the time you reach the response, you have already moved through the cue and the craving. The neurological train has left the station. Your basal ganglia has already initiated the sequence. Trying to stop at this point requires massive prefrontal cortex intervention. And as we covered in Chapter 1, that intervention depletes rapidly. Elite performers do not wait until the response to intervene. They interrupt the loop earlier, at the cue, at the craving, before the automatic machinery takes over. Part 4 is the reward. The reward is what your brain gets at the end of the loop. It is the dopamine hit that reinforces the entire sequence. And this is where your brain does something incredibly clever and incredibly dangerous. Your brain does not just enjoy the reward in the moment. It remembers the reward. It encodes the entire sequence, cue through reward, as a single chunk of behavior worth repeating. And over time, through repetition, that chunk gets handed off to the basal ganglia for automatic execution. Dr. Wolfram Schultz at Cambridge University discovered something even more troubling. After a habit is established, the dopamine release shifts. It no longer occurs at the reward. It starts occurring at the cue. Your brain begins anticipating the reward the moment it detects the trigger. This is why cravings feel so powerful. By the time you consciously recognize the urge, your brain has already begun releasing dopamine in anticipation of the reward. You are not fighting a neutral battle. You are fighting against a neurochemical wave that has already begun. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine someone who has a habit of checking their phone first thing in the morning. Here is how the loop works. The cue is waking up and seeing the phone on the nightstand. The craving is the desire for novelty, for stimulation, for connection. The response is grabbing the phone and opening social media or email. The reward is the small dopamine hit from new notifications, messages, or content. Now here is what happens after this loop repeats for weeks or months. The brain starts releasing dopamine the moment the person wakes up and sees the phone. Before they even touch it, the craving becomes almost unbearable. and the response becomes automatic. They do not decide to check the phone. They simply find it in their hand. This is not weakness. This is neuroscience. Average people see a bad habit and think, I need to stop doing that. Elite performers see a bad habit and think, I need to decode the loop driving that. Average people attack the response and wonder why they keep failing. Elite performers attack the cue and the craving and wonder why change suddenly feels easier. The loop is not your enemy. The loop is a machine. And like any machine, once you understand its components, you can take it apart and rebuild it. In the coming chapters, you will learn exactly how to do this. You will learn to audit your dopamine patterns and identify which loops are serving you and which are destroying you. You will learn to map your cues with forensic precision. You will learn to decode your cravings and find healthier ways to satisfy them. You will learn to design your environment so that negative cues disappear and positive cues become unavoidable. But first, you need to see your own loops clearly. You need to become a scientist of your own behavior. You need to stop judging yourself for your habits and start analyzing them instead. Because judgment leads to shame, and shame leads to relapse. But analysis leads to understanding, and understanding leads to change. You now know the four-part structure that drives every habit. Cue, craving, response, reward. You know that this loop runs automatically in your basal ganglia. You know that by the time you notice the urge, the neurological sequence has already begun. But knowing the loop is only the beginning. The next step is auditing your own brain's reward system. Because right now, whether you realize it or not, you have dozens of dopamine sources competing for your attention. Some are serving your goals. Many are sabotaging them. And until you identify which is which, you are operating blind. In Chapter 3, you will learn to conduct a dopamine audit. You will map exactly where your brain is getting its rewards. And you will discover why some sources of pleasure build your future while others steal it. The audit is about to begin. Chapter 3, the dopamine audit. Your brain is not broken. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is chasing dopamine. The problem is not the chase. The problem is what you have trained it to chase. A 2018 study from Stanford University's neuroscience department found something alarming. When researchers analyzed the dopamine patterns of over 400 participants, they discovered that 78% had unknowingly trained their brains to prioritize short-term rewards over long-term gains. Not because they were lazy, not because they lacked ambition, but because the modern environment bombards us with dopamine sources that our ancestors never encountered. Your great-grandparents had to work for their dopamine. They had to plant seeds and wait months for harvest. They had to build relationships over years of shared experience. They had to create things with their hands to feel accomplishment. Dopamine was earned through effort, and that effort created real value in their lives. You can get more dopamine in 5 minutes of social media scrolling than your great-grandparents got in an entire week. This is not an exaggeration. Brain imaging studies show that notifications, likes, comments, and new content trigger dopamine releases comparable to those produced by food and physical intimacy. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a dopamine hit from accomplishing something meaningful and a dopamine hit from refreshing your Instagram feed. But your life can tell the difference. Your career can tell the difference. Your relationships can tell the difference. Your future self can absolutely tell the difference. This is where the dopamine audit comes in. Before you can rewire your habits, you need to understand your current reward landscape. You need to see exactly where your brain is getting its dopamine, and you need to categorize those sources with ruthless honesty. There are two types of dopamine in your life. I call them earned dopamine and borrowed dopamine. Earned dopamine comes from activities that create real value. Completing a difficult project, having a deep conversation with someone you care about, exercising and feeling your body grow stronger, learning a new skill, making progress toward a meaningful goal. These activities require effort. They often involve discomfort, and they deposit something valuable into your future. Borrowed dopamine comes from activities that extract value. Scrolling social media, binge-watching content, eating junk food, mindless shopping, pornography, excessive video games. These activities require no effort. They feel good in the moment. but they withdraw from your future without depositing anything in return. Here is the critical insight. Your brain has a limited capacity for dopamine sensitivity. When you flood it with borrowed dopamine, you reduce its ability to feel pleasure from earned dopamine. This is called dopamine receptor downregulation, and it explains why high achievers often feel unsatisfied despite their accomplishments, while chronic scrollers feel empty despite hours of stimulation. Dr. Anna Lemke, chief of the Stanford Addiction Medicine Dual Diagnosis Clinic, describes this phenomenon in stark terms. When you repeatedly expose your brain to high dopamine, low-effort activities, your baseline dopamine level drops. You need more stimulation just to feel normal. Activities that once brought joy now feel boring. And the only way to feel anything at all is to chase even more intense sources of borrowed dopamine. This is the trap, and most people do not even know they are in it. The dopamine audit is designed to pull you out of this trap by making the invisible visible. Here's how it works. For the next 48 hours, I want you to track every activity that gives you pleasure. Every single one. Do not judge. Do not filter. Just observe and record. Write down what you did, how long you did it, and rate the dopamine intensity on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 means barely noticeable pleasure. 10 means intense, almost overwhelming pleasure. After 48 hours, categorize each activity. Ask yourself 3 questions. Question 1. Did this activity require effort or discomfort before the reward? If yes, it is likely earned dopamine. If no, it is likely borrowed dopamine. Question 2. Did this activity deposit something valuable into my future? Did it improve my health, my skills, my relationships, my career, or my character? If yes, it is earned. If no, it is borrowed. Question 3. How did I feel 2 hours after the activity ended? Did I feel energized and satisfied? Or did I feel drained and empty? Earned dopamine tends to leave you feeling fulfilled. Borrowed dopamine tends to leave you feeling hollow. When you complete this audit, you will have a clear map of your dopamine landscape. And I can almost guarantee you will be surprised by what you find. Most people discover that their highest intensity dopamine sources are almost entirely borrowed. They realize that the activities consuming most of their time are depositing nothing into their future. They see, often for the first time, exactly why they feel stuck despite being constantly stimulated. A 2021 study published in Nature Human Behavior tracked the daily activities of over 1,200 professionals. The researchers found that those who spent more than 3 hours daily on borrowed dopamine activities reported 42% lower life satisfaction than those who spent the same time on earned dopamine activities. Same amount of time, same amount of pleasure, radically different outcomes. This is not about eliminating pleasure from your life. This is about redirecting it. This is about training your brain to associate dopamine with activities that build your future instead of activities that steal it. Average people let their environment dictate their dopamine sources. Elite performers deliberately design their dopamine landscape. Average people feel guilty about their habits, but never analyze them. Elite performers audit their habits with the precision of a financial accountant reviewing a balance sheet. Think about how carefully most people manage their money. They track expenses, they budget, they invest for the future. They would never let random charges drain their bank account without investigation. But those same people let random dopamine sources drain their neurological bank account every single day without even noticing. Your dopamine is a resource. It is perhaps your most valuable resource. It determines what you find motivating. It shapes what you are willing to work for. It controls what feels rewarding and what feels boring. And right now, for most people, that resource is being squandered on activities that return nothing. The dopamine audit changes this. It gives you visibility, and visibility is the first step toward control. Once you complete your audit, you will notice something important. Your borrowed dopamine activities all share a common feature. They are triggered by something, a notification, a moment of boredom, a feeling of stress, a specific time of day, a particular location. These triggers are not random. They are consistent, and they are predictable. In Chapter 4, you will learn to map these triggers with forensic precision. You will create what I call a trigger map, a detailed analysis of exactly when, where, and why your borrowed dopamine habits get activated. Because once you can predict a behavior, you can prevent it. Once you can see the pattern, you can interrupt it. And once you understand your triggers, you can begin designing an environment where they simply do not fire. The audit reveals what you are chasing. The map reveals what is chasing you. Both are essential, and together, they give you something most people never have: clarity about your own behavior. The trigger mapping process begins now. Chapter 4: The Trigger Map. In the next 10 minutes, you will discover the invisible tripwires that have been sabotaging you for years. These tripwires fire automatically. They operate beneath your conscious awareness. And once you see them clearly, you can never unsee them. Every bad habit you have is preceded by a trigger. Every single one. The habit does not appear out of nowhere. It does not randomly possess you like some external force. Something in your environment or your internal state activates the sequence. And until you identify that something with precision, you are fighting an enemy you cannot see. Most people never do this work. They focus entirely on the behavior itself. They say things like, "I need to stop checking my phone so much," or "I need to stop snacking at night," or "I need to stop procrastinating on important tasks." But this is like trying to stop a river by building a dam at its mouth. The water is already flowing. The momentum is already there. By the time you notice the behavior, the neurological cascade has begun. Your basal ganglia has initiated the sequence. Your dopamine system is anticipating the reward, and your depleted prefrontal cortex is left trying to override a process that started minutes or even hours before. Elite performers understand this. They do not build dams at the river's mouth. They go upstream. They find a source. They identify exactly where the water begins to flow. This is what the trigger map does. It takes you upstream. In 2014, researchers at Duke University conducted one of the most comprehensive studies ever done on habit triggers. They followed over 800 participants for 6 weeks, asking them to record every instance of habitual behavior and everything that preceded it. The patterns that emerged were remarkably consistent. The researchers identified 5 categories of triggers, just 5, and nearly every habit across all 800 participants could be traced back to one or more of these categories. Category 1 is time. Certain habits fire at specific times of day. The morning coffee, the afternoon energy slump that leads to snacking, the late night scroll before bed. Time-based triggers are powerful because they are predictable. Your brain learns to anticipate the habit as a particular hour approaches. Category 2 is location. Where you are physically located can trigger habits with astonishing reliability. The couch triggers television. The desk triggers checking email. The kitchen triggers snacking. The car triggers certain music or podcasts. Your brain creates strong associations between physical spaces and specific behaviors. Category 3 is emotional state. This is perhaps the most powerful trigger category. Stress triggers comfort-seeking behaviors. Boredom triggers stimulation-seeking behaviors. Anxiety triggers avoidance behaviors. Loneliness triggers connection-seeking behaviors, often through social media. Sadness triggers numbing behaviors. Your emotional state acts as a gateway to specific habit loops. Category 4 is other people. The presence of certain individuals can activate habits you would never perform alone. You might eat more around certain friends. You might drink more in certain social circles. You might complain more around certain colleagues. Social triggers operate largely outside your awareness, which makes them particularly dangerous. Category 5 is the preceding action. This is the trigger most people miss entirely. One behavior often triggers another in a chain. Sitting down at your computer triggers checking email. Checking email triggers checking social media. Checking social media triggers watching a video. Watching one video triggers watching another. These chains can stretch for hours, all initiated by a single preceding action. The trigger map requires you to analyze your borrowed dopamine habits through all 5 lenses. Take one habit you want to change, just one. Now ask yourself these questions. When does this habit typically occur? Is there a specific time of day when it is most likely to happen? Morning, afternoon, evening, or late at night? Where does this habit typically occur? What physical location are you in when it happens? What room? What building? What environment? What emotional state precedes this habit? Are you stressed, bored, anxious, lonely, overwhelmed, tired, frustrated, sad? Who is present when this habit occurs? Are you alone? Are certain people nearby? Does the habit happen more frequently in specific social contexts? What action immediately precedes this habit? What were you doing in the 60 seconds before the habit began? What task did you just complete or abandon? When you answer these questions honestly, patterns will emerge. You will notice that your habit does not fire randomly. It fires under specific, predictable conditions. A 2019 study from the University of British Columbia demonstrated the power of this awareness. Participants who completed detailed trigger mapping for their unwanted habits were 61% more successful at changing those behaviors compared to participants who simply tried to stop through willpower. 61%, just from identifying the triggers. Knowledge is not just power. Knowledge is prevention. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine someone who has a habit of stress eating in the evening. Through trigger mapping, they discover the following pattern. Time. The habit occurs between 8 and 10 at night. Location. The habit occurs in the living room, specifically on the couch. Emotional state. The habit is preceded by feelings of exhaustion and mental fatigue after a long workday. Other people. The habit occurs when alone. It rarely happens when their partner is home. Preceding action. The habit is triggered by sitting down and turning on the television. Now this person has a map. They can see the tripwires clearly. And with this visibility, they have options they never had before. They could change the time by going to bed earlier or scheduling an activity between 8 and 10. They could change the location by avoiding the couch in the evening or sitting in a different chair. They could address the emotional state by implementing a decompression routine after work before the exhaustion accumulates. They could change the social context by scheduling calls with friends during this window or ensuring their partner is present. They could interrupt the preceding action by not turning on the television or replacing it with a different activity. Notice what is not on this list. Willpower. There is no gritting of teeth, no white-knuckling through temptation. Instead, there is strategic intervention at the source of the problem. Average people experience triggers and react to them. Elite performers anticipate triggers and neutralize them. Average people fight their habits in the moment of temptation. Elite performers design their lives so that the moment of temptation rarely arrives. Your trigger map is unique to you. My triggers are not your triggers. The conditions that activate my bad habits are different from the conditions that activate yours. This is why generic advice like just stop doing it fails so consistently. It ignores the individual architecture of each person's habit loops. You must become a detective of your own behavior. You must observe yourself without judgment. You must collect data on your own patterns with the same rigor a scientist brings to an experiment. Because once you have the map, something remarkable becomes possible. You can start redesigning your environment to eliminate the triggers entirely. You can create what I call friction, obstacles that interrupt the habit loop before it gains momentum. In Chapter 5, you will learn the most powerful environmental design principle I have ever encountered. It is called the 20-second friction rule, and it explains why the most disciplined people in the world do not actually have more willpower than you. They have simply made their bad habits harder to perform and their good habits easier to start. By exactly 20 seconds. The architecture of your environment is about to change. Chapter 5, the 20-second friction rule. The most disciplined people in the world do not have more willpower than you. They do not possess some genetic advantage for self-control. They do not wake up every morning with an inexhaustible reserve of mental strength. They have simply made one decision that changes everything. They have made their bad habits slightly harder to perform and their good habits slightly easier to start. By exactly 20 seconds. This insight comes from Shawn Achor, a Harvard researcher who spent over a decade studying the science of positive psychology. Achor discovered something remarkable about human behavior. The activation energy required to start a task, the initial effort needed to begin, determines whether most people will do it or not. If a behavior requires even a small amount of extra effort, participation drops dramatically. If a behavior is made even slightly easier, participation increases dramatically. And the threshold where this effect becomes most powerful is approximately 20 seconds. 20 seconds of additional friction can stop a bad habit in its tracks. 20 seconds of removed friction can make a good habit nearly automatic. This sounds almost too simple, but the research is overwhelming. In one of Aker's experiments, he wanted to practice guitar more consistently. He had been failing for months. The guitar sat in his closet, and despite his genuine desire to play, he almost never took it out. So he tried an experiment. He moved the guitar out of the closet and placed it on a stand in the middle of his living room. He reduced the friction to start playing by approximately 20 seconds. The result was immediate. His guitar practice went from almost zero to regular daily sessions. Nothing else changed. Same motivation, same schedule, same guitar. The only difference was 20 seconds of friction removed. Then he ran the reverse experiment. He wanted to watch less television. So he took the batteries out of his remote and placed them in a drawer in another room. This added approximately 20 seconds of friction to watching television. His television consumption dropped by over 50%. Again, nothing else changed. Same television, same shows available, same desire for entertainment, just 20 seconds of added friction. A 2017 study published in the Journal of Consumer Psychology replicated this effect at scale. Researchers found that when healthy food options were placed 20 seconds closer to participants than unhealthy options, healthy food consumption increased by 34%. When unhealthy options were made 20 seconds more accessible, unhealthy consumption increased by the same margin. Your environment is not neutral. It is actively shaping your behavior every moment of every day. And small changes in the friction landscape produce massive changes in outcomes. Let me explain why this works from a neurological perspective. Remember the basal ganglia from Chapter 1. This is the brain region that handles automatic behaviors. It operates on pattern recognition and minimal effort. The basal ganglia is essentially lazy by design. It evolved to conserve energy. It prefers the path of least resistance. When you add friction to a behavior, you force the basal ganglia to hand control back to the prefrontal cortex. The automatic system cannot execute because there is an obstacle. The conscious system must engage. And in that moment of conscious engagement, you have a choice. 20 seconds is the threshold because it is long enough to break the automatic sequence, but short enough to seem insignificant when you are designing your environment. You are not building walls. You are building speed bumps. And those speed bumps are enough to interrupt the habit loop before it completes. Now let me show you how to apply this principle systematically. For every bad habit you identified in your dopamine audit, ask yourself one question. How can I add 20 seconds of friction to this behavior? If your bad habit is checking your phone first thing in the morning, do not keep the phone on your nightstand. Put it in another room. Now checking it requires getting out of bed, walking to another room, and retrieving the device. 20 seconds of friction, maybe more. If your bad habit is mindless social media scrolling, delete the apps from your phone. You can still access the sites through a browser, but now you must open the browser, type the address, and log in. 20 seconds of friction. If your bad habit is snacking on junk food, do not keep it in your house. If you want junk food, you have to get dressed, get in your car, drive to a store, purchase it, and drive back. That is far more than 20 seconds. The friction becomes so high that the behavior rarely happens. If your bad habit is watching excessive television, unplug the TV after each use. Put the remote in a drawer in another room. Cancel the streaming service that makes content instantly available. Each layer adds friction. Now reverse the principle for good habits. How can I remove 20 seconds of friction from behaviors I want to perform? If you want to exercise in the morning, sleep in your workout clothes. Place your shoes next to the bed. Have your gym bag packed by the door. Remove every obstacle between waking up and starting your workout. If you want to read more books, place a book on your pillow every morning. When you get into bed at night, the book is already there. The friction to start reading is nearly zero. If you want to eat healthier, spend time on the weekend preparing meals and placing them in clear containers at the front of your refrigerator. When you open the fridge, The healthy choice requires less effort than any alternative. If you want to practice a skill, set up your environment so that starting requires no preparation. Leave the instrument out. Leave the software open. Leave the materials on your desk. Make the first step effortless. A study from the University of Pennsylvania found that gym attendance increased by 29% when participants chose gyms that were on their direct commute rather than gyms that required even a small detour. The quality of the gym did not matter. The equipment did not matter. The only variable that predicted consistent attendance was friction. Average people rely on motivation to overcome environmental friction. Elite performers eliminate the friction so that motivation becomes unnecessary. Average people design environments that test their willpower daily. Elite performers design environments where willpower is rarely required. This is not about being lazy. This is about being strategic. You have limited cognitive resources. Every decision depletes your prefrontal cortex. Every moment of resistance costs mental energy. Why waste those resources fighting your environment when you could simply change the environment? The most productive people I have studied do not have superhuman self-control. They have superhuman environment design. They spend time on the front end arranging their world so that the right behaviors require minimal effort and the wrong behaviors require maximum effort. This is the shift from willpower-based change to architecture-based change. And it is the only approach that works reliably over the long term. You now have the tools to audit your dopamine sources, map your triggers, and design friction into your environment. These are the external mechanics of habit change. They address the cue and the response portions of the habit loop. But there is another level, a deeper level, the level where habits become truly effortless because they are no longer behaviors you perform, but expressions of who you are. In Chapter 6, you will learn about identity architecture. You will discover the neurological difference between someone who says, "I am trying to quit smoking," and someone who says, "I am not a smoker." You will understand why identity-based change is permanent while behavior-based change is temporary. And you will begin building a new neurological self. Chapter 6, Identity Architecture. Neuroscientists at Dartmouth College made a stunning discovery in 2015. They placed participants in fMRI machines and asked them to respond to temptations related to habits they were trying to break. Some participants were instructed to say, "I can't do that." Others were instructed to say, "I don't do that." The brain scans revealed something remarkable. When participants said, "I can't," the prefrontal cortex lit up intensely. The willpower center was working hard, fighting against the temptation, expending energy to resist. But when participants said, "I don't," a completely different pattern emerged. The prefrontal cortex remained relatively calm. Instead, regions associated with self-identity and long-term memory showed increased activity. The brain was not fighting. It was simply confirming a fact about who the person was. The difference between "I can't" and "I don't" is not semantic. It is neurological, and it explains why some people struggle endlessly with habit change while others seem to transform effortlessly. "I can't eat sugar" is a restriction. It implies deprivation. It positions you as someone who wants sugar but is being denied. Every time you say it, your brain registers a conflict between your desire and your behavior. That conflict creates stress. That stress depletes willpower. And eventually, the restriction fails. "I don't eat sugar" is an identity statement. It implies no deprivation because there is nothing to deprive. You are simply stating a fact about the kind of person you are. There is no conflict because your desire and your identity are aligned. The behavior is not something you are forcing yourself to do. It is simply who you are. This distinction changes everything. A 2012 study published in the Journal of Consumer Research tested this exact difference. Participants were divided into two groups. One group was taught to refuse temptations by saying, "I can't." The other group was taught to say, "I don't." Then both groups were tracked for 10 days as they pursued health goals. The results were dramatic. In the "I can't" group, only 39% of participants remained consistent with their goals. In the "I don't" group, 80% remained consistent. Same goals, same temptations, same time period. The only difference was 3 letters. Can't versus don't. This is the power of identity-based habit change. Most people approach habits from the outside in. They start with the outcome they want. Lose weight, quit smoking, stop procrastinating. Then they work backward to the behaviors required. Exercise more, avoid cigarettes, start tasks earlier. And finally, if they are sophisticated, they might consider what kind of person achieves those outcomes. This approach is backwards. It starts at the weakest point and works toward the strongest. Elite performers approach habits from the inside out. They start with identity. They ask themselves who they want to become. Then they work outward to the behaviors that person would naturally perform. And finally, they let the outcomes emerge as natural consequences of the identity and behaviors. Let me make this concrete. The outside-in approach says, I want to lose 20 pounds, so I need to run 3 times per week, which means I need to become a runner. The inside-out approach says, I am a runner. Runners run. Therefore, I run 3 times per week. And weight loss is a natural consequence. The difference seems subtle, but it is profound. When your identity drives your behavior, motivation becomes irrelevant. You do not need motivation to brush your teeth because you identify as someone who practices basic hygiene. You do not need motivation to show up at your job because you identify as a professional. You do not need motivation to feed your children because you identify as a parent. These behaviors are effortless not because they are easy, but because they are expressions of who you are. Resistance does not exist because there is no internal conflict. This is identity architecture, the deliberate construction of a new self-concept that makes your desired behaviors automatic. So how do you build a new identity? How do you shift from, I am trying to quit, to, I am not a person who does that? The answer lies in something neuroscientists call self-concept consolidation. Your brain's sense of who you are is not fixed. It is constantly being updated based on evidence. Every action you take is a vote for the kind of person you are. And over time, those votes accumulate into a self-concept. If you go to the gym once, you are not an athlete. But if you go to the gym consistently for 6 months, your brain begins consolidating the evidence. You start seeing yourself as someone who exercises. The identity forms. If you resist checking your phone once, you are not a focused person. But if you consistently choose deep work over distraction, your brain updates its self-concept. You become someone who focuses. The identity forms. The key is not grand transformations. The key is small, consistent actions that cast votes for your new identity. A 2018 study from the University of Chicago found that identity change follows a predictable pattern. First, the behavior feels forced and effortful. You are acting against your current self-concept. Second, with repetition, the behavior becomes easier but still feels somewhat foreign. Third, the brain begins incorporating the behavior into its model of who you are. Finally, the behavior feels natural and automatic because it is now an expression of identity rather than a deviation from it. This process takes time. Researchers estimate that significant identity shifts require somewhere between 60 and 90 days of consistent behavior, not 21 days, as the popular myth suggests. 60 to 90 days of casting votes for your new self. But here is the encouraging part. You do not need perfect consistency. You need majority consistency. If most of your votes go toward your new identity, the shift will occur. Occasional lapses do not reset the process. They are simply outvoted by the larger pattern. Average people try to change their behavior while keeping their identity intact. Elite performers change their identity and let behavior follow naturally. Average people say, I am trying to become someone who exercises. Elite performers say, I am someone who exercises. Today's workout is just confirmation. There is a practical technique that accelerates this process. It is called identity priming, and it involves deliberately affirming your new identity before situations where old behaviors might surface. Before entering a social situation where you might be tempted to drink, say to yourself, I am not a drinker. Not, I am trying not to drink tonight. Not, I probably should not drink. Simply, I am not a drinker. Before sitting down to work, say to yourself, I am someone who focuses deeply. Not, I will try to focus today. Not, I hope I do not get distracted. Simply, I am someone who focuses deeply. These affirmations are not magical thinking. They are neurological priming. They activate the brain regions associated with self-identity. They make your new self-concept more accessible, and they reduce the willpower required to act consistently with that identity. You have now learned to audit your dopamine, map your triggers, design environmental friction, and architect your identity. These tools address the full habit loop. They work with your brain instead of against it. They create lasting change because they transform the system rather than fighting against it. But there is one more piece we have not addressed. What happens when you need to remove a habit entirely? You cannot simply create a void. Your brain does not tolerate empty loops. In Chapter 7, you will learn the replacement stack. You will discover why every habit you remove must be replaced with something else. And you will learn the specific criteria for choosing replacements that satisfy the same underlying craving without the negative consequences. The stack is about to be built. Chapter 7, the replacement stack. Here is what the habit gurus do not tell you. You cannot simply remove a habit. Your brain abhors a vacuum. Every time you try to eliminate a behavior without replacing it, you create an empty space in your neurological routine, and that empty space will be filled, either by a conscious choice or by whatever craving-driven impulse rushes in to occupy the void. This is why pure elimination strategies fail so consistently. A 2013 study from the University of Hertfordshire tracked over 3,000 people attempting to break unwanted habits. The researchers divided participants into two groups. One group was instructed to simply stop the behavior, resist the urge, say no. The other group was instructed to replace the behavior with a predetermined alternative whenever the urge arose. After 3 months, only 12% of the elimination group had succeeded, but 43% of the replacement group had maintained their change, nearly 4 times the success rate. Same habits, same motivation, same time period. The only difference was replacement versus elimination. Your basal ganglia does not understand deletion. It only understands substitution. When a cue fires, it expects a routine to follow. When that routine leads to a reward, the loop is complete. If you try to delete the routine without providing an alternative, the basal ganglia keeps searching. It keeps firing. It keeps pushing you towards some behavior that will deliver the expected reward. This is why people who quit smoking often gain weight. They have eliminated one routine, but left the underlying craving unaddressed. The cue still fires. The craving for stress relief or oral stimulation still arises. And without a planned replacement, the brain finds the next available behavior that delivers a similar reward. Food. This is why people who quit drinking often become addicted to sugar or caffeine. The elimination created a void. The void demanded filling, and the brain found the nearest available substitute. The replacement stack is designed to address this problem systematically. Instead of fighting your cravings, you redirect them. Instead of leaving voids, you fill them deliberately. Instead of hoping the urge goes away, you satisfy it through a healthier channel. Here is how to build your stack. Step 1. Identify the craving beneath the habit. Remember from Chapter 2 that the craving is not for the habit itself. It is for the reward the habit delivers. You do not crave the cigarette. You crave the stress relief. You do not crave the social media scroll. You crave the stimulation or escape from boredom. You do not crave the junk food. You crave the comfort or the taste pleasure. Be specific. What emotional or physical reward does your habit actually provide? Write it down. Name it precisely. Step 2. Generate alternative behaviors that deliver the same category of reward. This is critical. The replacement must satisfy the same underlying craving. If your habit provides stress relief, your replacement must also provide stress relief. If your habit provides stimulation, your replacement must also provide stimulation. A 2016 study from Duke University found that replacement success was directly correlated with reward similarity. Replacements that delivered the same category of reward had a 71% success rate. Replacements that delivered different rewards had only a 23% success rate. The craving must be satisfied. The question is how. Let me give you concrete examples. If your habit is stress eating, the underlying craving is comfort or emotional soothing. Potential replacements include deep breathing exercises, a brief walk outside, calling a friend, drinking hot tea, or progressive muscle relaxation. Each of these provides genuine comfort without the negative consequences of stress eating. If your habit is mindless social media scrolling, the underlying craving might be stimulation, connection, or escape from boredom. Potential replacements include reading an engaging article, texting a real friend, listening to a podcast, doing a quick puzzle, or playing a brief musical instrument session. Each provides stimulation or connection without the dopamine hijacking of algorithmic feeds. If your habit is procrastinating through distraction, the underlying craving might be avoidance of discomfort or fear of failure. Potential replacements include the 2-minute rule, where you commit to just 2 minutes of the avoided task, journaling about the resistance, breaking the task into smaller pieces, or pairing the task with something enjoyable like background music. Step 3. Create a specific if-then plan. This is where the stack becomes concrete. You are not simply listing alternatives. You are creating predetermined responses that fire automatically when the cue appears. The format is simple. If I experience the urge to do the old behavior, then I will immediately do the replacement behavior instead. If I feel the urge to check social media when bored, then I will immediately read 3 pages of my book instead. If I feel the urge to snack when stressed, then I will immediately take 5 deep breaths and drink a glass of water instead. If I feel the urge to procrastinate on a difficult task, then I will immediately set a timer and work for just 2 minutes instead. Research from New York University found that if-then planning increases follow-through by approximately 300% compared to simple intentions. The specificity removes decision-making from the moment of temptation. You have already decided. You simply execute. Step 4. Stack multiple replacements for the same craving. This is why it is called a stack. One replacement is fragile. If that single alternative is unavailable or unappealing in the moment, you are left with no options. But a stack of 3 or 4 replacements gives you resilience. For stress relief, your stack might include deep breathing, walking, calling a friend, and drinking tea. In any given moment, at least one of those options will be available and appealing. For stimulation, your stack might include reading, podcasts, puzzles, and music. Variety prevents boredom with the replacement itself. For comfort, your stack might include hot beverages, warm baths, soft music, and gentle stretching. Multiple pathways to the same reward. Average people try to eliminate habits through pure resistance. Elite performers build stacks of replacements that satisfy the same craving through healthier channels. Average people fight their urges and eventually lose. Elite performers redirect their urges and transform the energy into something constructive. There is one more element that makes the replacement stack powerful. Each replacement you perform casts a vote for your new identity. Remember Chapter 6. You are not just changing behavior. You are accumulating evidence for a new self-concept. Every time you take deep breaths instead of stress eating, you vote for being someone who manages stress constructively. Every time you read a book instead of scrolling social media, you vote for being someone who values depth over distraction. Every time you work for 2 minutes instead of procrastinating, you vote for being someone who takes action despite resistance. The stack is not just a behavioral strategy. It is an identity-building mechanism. You now have the tools to redirect your cravings constructively. You understand that elimination fails and replacement succeeds. You know how to identify underlying rewards and find alternative behaviors that deliver the same category of satisfaction. But there is one more challenge waiting. The challenge that defeats most people even when they have all the right tools. Failure. You will stumble. You will have moments when the old habit wins. You will experience setbacks that make you question whether change is possible. In Chapter 8, you will learn the Rebound protocol. You will discover why most people spiral after a single failure, while others recover immediately. You will understand the neurochemistry of shame and how it triggers relapse cycles. And you will have a step-by-step system for getting back on track within minutes, not days. Because the question is not whether you will fall. The question is what happens next. Chapter 8, the Rebound Protocol. A research team at Yale University tracked 500 people attempting to break unwanted habits over the course of 1 year. They monitored every slip, every relapse, every moment of failure. And they discovered something that changes everything we think about habit change. 92% of participants failed at least once during the year. 92%. This means that failure is not the exception. It is the rule. It is virtually guaranteed. But here is where the data becomes fascinating. Of those who failed, only 8% recovered and continued making progress. The other 92% of failures spiraled into complete relapse within 72 hours of the initial slip. The difference between the 8% who recovered and the 92% who spiraled was not willpower. It was not motivation. It was not support systems or environmental design. It was what happened in the 60 seconds immediately following the failure. The people who spiraled had a specific pattern. They experienced the slip. They felt guilt and shame. They engaged in negative self-talk. They told themselves things like, "I knew I couldn't do this. I'm weak. What's the point of trying?" And then, because they had already failed, they abandoned all restraint. One cookie became 10. One skipped workout became a month of inactivity. One cigarette became a full pack. Researchers call this the what the hell effect. Once a boundary is broken, the brain perceives the entire effort as ruined. And if the effort is ruined, there is no reason to continue restraining. The people who recovered had a completely different pattern. They experienced the same slip, but their internal response was radically different. They acknowledged the failure without judgment. They analyzed what went wrong. They recommitted immediately, and they continued as if the slip was a minor detour rather than a catastrophic derailment. The Rebound protocol is designed to move you from the spiral pattern to the recovery pattern. It gives you a specific sequence of actions to perform in the 60 seconds after any failure, and it prevents the neurochemical cascade that turns one slip into complete relapse. Here is why this matters from a brain science perspective. When you fail at something you care about, your brain releases cortisol, the stress hormone. This is natural. But when you add shame and self-criticism to the failure, cortisol levels spike dramatically. A 2014 study from the University of California, Berkeley found that self-compassionate responses to failure produced 47% less cortisol than self-critical responses. High cortisol does something devastating to habit change. It pushes your brain toward familiar comfort behaviors. It activates your basal ganglia's strongest patterns. It makes your worst habits feel irresistible precisely when you can least afford them. This is the spiral mechanism. Failure triggers shame. Shame triggers cortisol. Cortisol triggers comfort seeking. Comfort seeking activates old habits. Old habits create more failure. More failure creates more shame. The cycle accelerates until you are right back where you started. The Rebound protocol interrupts this cycle at the earliest possible point. Step 1. Pause and breathe. The moment you realize you have slipped, stop everything. Take 3 slow, deep breaths. This is not meditation. This is neurological intervention. Deep breathing activates your parasympathetic nervous system and begins reducing cortisol immediately. You are buying yourself time before the spiral mechanism engages. Step 2. State the facts without judgment. Say to yourself, out loud if possible, exactly what happened. Not an interpretation, not a judgment, just the facts. I ate a cookie when I planned not to. Not, I'm a failure with no self-control. I checked social media during my focus block. Not, I'll never be able to concentrate. I skipped my workout this morning. Not, I always quit when things get hard. The factual statement keeps your prefrontal cortex engaged. The judgmental statement triggers the amygdala and floods your system with more cortisol. Facts calm, judgments escalate. Step 3. Apply the mathematician's mindset. A mathematician who gets a problem wrong does not conclude that they are terrible at math. They look at the specific error, identify what went wrong, and adjust their approach for the next problem. Ask yourself 2 analytical questions. What was the trigger that led to this slip? What could I do differently next time to prevent or interrupt that trigger? This reframes the failure as data rather than identity. You are not a bad person. You are a scientist who encountered an unexpected variable. Now you have more information for your experiment. Step 4. Recommit immediately and specifically. Do not wait until tomorrow. Do not wait until Monday. Do not wait until you feel ready. Recommit in this exact moment to one specific action. I will drink a glass of water right now and continue with my eating plan for the rest of today. I will close social media right now and complete 15 minutes of focused work. I will take a 10-minute walk right now since I missed my full workout. The immediate action creates a new data point. It casts a vote for your desired identity. It prevents the what the hell effect by demonstrating that one failure does not define the entire day. Step 5. Zoom out to your overall pattern. After you have completed the immediate recommitment, take a moment to assess your broader trajectory. How many days have you been consistent? How many slips have you had? What is the ratio? Most people who slip have actually been doing well overall. They have won far more battles than they have lost. But in the moment of failure, they forget all of that. They see only the current slip. Zooming out restores perspective. If you have been consistent for 14 days and slipped once, your success rate is over 93%. That is remarkable. One data point does not erase 14 days of evidence for your new identity. Average people treat every failure as proof that they cannot change. Elite performers treat every failure as information about how to change more effectively. Average people let one slip become a cascade of slips. Elite performers contain each slip to a single incident and return immediately to their trajectory. There is a concept in aviation called the sterile cockpit rule. During critical phases of flight, pilots are prohibited from discussing anything unrelated to the immediate task. This rule exists because distractions during crucial moments cause accidents. Your 60 seconds after a failure are your sterile cockpit. This is not the time for lengthy self-analysis. This is not the time for emotional processing. This is not the time to call a friend and discuss your feelings. This is the time to execute the Rebound protocol with mechanical precision. Breathe, state facts, analyze, recommit, zoom out. 5 steps, 60 seconds. The difference between spiral and recovery. You now have the tools to handle failure without derailment. But there is one more challenge we have not addressed. The challenge of high-stress situations where your old habits have the strongest pull. Stress does something specific to your brain. It depletes your prefrontal cortex faster. It amplifies signals from your basal ganglia. It makes your oldest, most ingrained patterns feel irresistible. In Chapter 9, you will learn to stress-proof your new habits. You will discover why your brain defaults to old patterns under pressure. And you will build pre-planned responses that work even when your cognitive resources are depleted. Because the real test of habit change is not what you do on good days. It is what you do when everything falls apart. Chapter 9. Stress-proofing your habits. Under stress, your brain does not default to your goals. It defaults to your oldest patterns. This is not a character flaw. This is neurobiology. And until you understand it and plan for it, stress will continue to sabotage your progress. A landmark study from UCLA's neuroscience department tracked the behavior of 200 professionals during high-stress periods at work. The researchers measured stress levels through cortisol testing and simultaneously monitored habit behaviors. The findings were stark. When stress levels increased significantly, bad habit activation increased by 340%, not 34%, 340%. Participants who had been successfully managing their habits for weeks suddenly reverted to old patterns with alarming consistency. The researchers identified the mechanism. Under stress, your prefrontal cortex becomes impaired. The region responsible for conscious decision-making, impulse control, and long-term thinking literally begins to shut down as cortisol floods your system. Meanwhile, your basal ganglia remains fully operational, and your basal ganglia contains your oldest, most deeply ingrained patterns. This is why you reach for junk food after a terrible meeting. This is why you pour a drink after receiving bad news. This is why you mindlessly scroll your phone when anxiety peaks. Your conscious mind has been taken offline. Your autopilot has taken over, and your autopilot is running software that was installed years ago. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The habits you are building right now are new. They are fragile. They have not yet been deeply encoded in your basal ganglia. Under normal conditions, your prefrontal cortex can keep these new patterns running. But under stress, when the prefrontal cortex goes offline, the new patterns disappear. Only the old patterns remain accessible. This is not failure. This is neuroscience. The solution is not to avoid stress. That is impossible. The solution is to stress-proof your habits by creating pre-planned responses that require minimal cognitive resources to execute. I call these stress protocols. They are specific, predetermined actions designed to fire automatically when stress appears. And they work because they bypass the need for the prefrontal cortex to make decisions in the moment. Here is how to build your stress protocols. Step 1. Identify your high-stress triggers. Not your habit triggers from Chapter 4. Your stress triggers. What situations reliably produce elevated cortisol in your life? For some people, it is conflict with a spouse or family member. For others, it is work deadlines or difficult conversations with supervisors. For others, it is financial pressure, health concerns, or social anxiety. For many, it is simply the accumulation of small frustrations throughout a demanding day. Write down your top 3 to 5 stress triggers. Be specific. Step 2. Identify your stress-activated habits. When each of those triggers fires, what old habit tends to emerge? There is usually a consistent pattern. Specific types of stress activate specific types of habits. Work stress might activate snacking. Relationship stress might activate drinking. Social anxiety might activate phone scrolling. Financial stress might activate mindless shopping. Map the connections. Stress trigger A leads to habit B. Stress trigger C leads to habit D. You need to see these patterns clearly before you can interrupt them. Step 3. Create implementation intentions for each stress habit pair. This is the core of stress proofing. An implementation intention is a pre-planned response in the format of if-then. If I experience work deadline stress, then I will immediately take a 5-minute walk outside before doing anything else. If I have a conflict with my partner, then I will immediately do 3 minutes of deep breathing before responding or reaching for any substance. If I feel financial anxiety rising, then I will immediately write down 3 things I am grateful for before making any purchases. The specificity matters enormously. Research from the University of Konstanz in Germany found that implementation intentions increased follow-through under stress by 260% compared to general commitments. The pre-planning removes decision-making from the stressful moment. You have already decided. You simply execute. Step 4. Practice your protocols under low-stress conditions. This is counterintuitive but critical. You cannot learn a new response when cortisol is flooding your brain. You must rehearse the response repeatedly when you are calm so that it becomes encoded before the stress arrives. Visualize yourself in the stressful situation. See the trigger appearing. Feel the stress beginning to rise. Then mentally rehearse executing your implementation intention. Walk through the sequence step by step. A 2011 study from the University of Chicago found that mental rehearsal of stress responses was nearly as effective as actual practice for encoding new behavioral patterns. Your brain cannot fully distinguish between vivid imagination and real experience. Use this to your advantage. Step 5. Create environmental safeguards for high-stress periods. When you know a stressful period is approaching, add extra friction to your stress-activated habits and remove friction from your replacement behaviors. If work deadlines are approaching and you know stress eating is your pattern, remove all junk food from your home during that period. Stock the refrigerator with healthy alternatives that require zero preparation. If you have a difficult family event coming and you know drinking is your pattern, do not have alcohol in your house during that period. Plan non-alcoholic beverages you actually enjoy. If financial stress is building and mindless shopping is your pattern, remove saved payment information from websites. Unsubscribe from promotional emails. Add friction before the stress arrives. Average people hope they will handle stress well when it arrives. Elite performers know they will not handle stress well, so they build systems that handle stress for them. Average people wait until the stressful moment to decide what to do. Elite performers make decisions during calm moments and simply execute during stressful moments. There is one more technique that dramatically increases stress resilience. It is called stress inoculation, and it involves deliberately exposing yourself to small amounts of manageable stress while practicing your new habits. The concept comes from immunology. A vaccine exposes your immune system to a weakened version of a pathogen so it can build defenses before encountering the real threat. Stress inoculation works similarly. You deliberately practice your new habits under mildly stressful conditions so they become more resilient when major stress arrives. If your new habit is focused work, practice it while slightly hungry or slightly tired. Not exhausted, just mildly depleted. This builds resilience. If your new habit is healthy eating, practice making good choices when you are moderately stressed about something. Not during a crisis, just during a challenging day. Each successful execution under mild stress strengthens the neural pathway. Over time, the habit becomes accessible even when cortisol levels rise. You now have the tools to audit your dopamine, map your triggers, design your environment, architect your identity, build replacement stacks, recover from failure, and stress-proof your new patterns. These are the complete mechanics of neurological habit change. In the final chapter, you will put everything together into a 30-day implementation blueprint. Week by week, day by day, you will have a precise roadmap for rewiring your brain. No guessing, no improvising, just systematic execution of the principles you have learned. Your transformation has a timeline, and it begins now. Chapter 10, your 30-day Rewire Blueprint. 30 days from now, you could be exactly where you are today. Same habits, same frustrations, same cycle of trying and failing. Or you could be operating with a fundamentally rewired brain. New patterns encoded, new identity solidified. The difference is systematic implementation of everything you have learned. This chapter gives you the exact blueprint. Week by week, no guessing, just execute. Week 1 is audit and map. Days 1 through 7 are dedicated to observation and analysis. On days 1 and 2, complete your dopamine audit. Track every activity that gives you pleasure. Categorize each as earned dopamine or borrowed dopamine. On days 3 and 4, select one primary habit you want to break. Just one. Research from Stanford's Behavior Design Lab shows that trying to change multiple habits simultaneously has a failure rate over 90%. On days 5, 6, and 7, complete your trigger map for that single habit. Record the time, location, emotional state, people present, and preceding action every time the urge arises. Week 2 is design and friction. Days 8 through 14 are dedicated to environmental architecture. On days 8 and 9, apply the 20-second friction rule. Add obstacles to your target habit. Move the phone. Delete the apps. Remove the junk food. On days 10 and 11, remove friction from your replacement behaviors. Put the book on the pillow. Leave the running shoes by the door. Make healthy choices effortless. On days 12 through 14, build your replacement stack. Create at least 3 alternative behaviors with specific, if then, implementation intentions for each one. Week 3 is identity and replace. Days 15 through 21 are dedicated to neurological reprogramming. On days 15 and 16, craft your identity statements in present tense. Not, I am trying to quit, but I am someone who values presence over distraction. On days 17 through 19, practice identity priming. State your affirmation every morning. Review your votes every evening. On days 20 and 21, begin active replacement. When triggers fire, execute your if-then plans immediately. If you slip, execute the rebound protocol. Breathe. State facts. Analyze. Recommit. Zoom out. Week 4 is stress-proof and solidify. Days 22 through 30 are dedicated to building resilience. On days 22 and 23, create implementation intentions for your stress habit pairs. On days 24 through 26, practice stress inoculation. Execute your new habits under mildly challenging conditions. On days 27 through 30, review and optimize. Calculate your success rate. If you executed successfully on 24 out of 30 days, that is 80%. That is real neurological change. Average people try to change habits through random efforts and sporadic motivation. Elite performers follow systematic blueprints that account for how the brain actually works. After day 30, continue. Research from the European Journal of Social Psychology shows habit formation takes an average of 66 days. But after completing this blueprint, those additional days will feel different. Easier, more natural. You are not someone trying to break bad habits. You are someone who has spent 30 days systematically rewiring your brain. You have audited your dopamine, mapped your triggers, designed your environment, architected your identity, built your replacement stack, learned to rebound from failure, stress-proofed your patterns. Stop fighting your willpower. Start using your biology. The rewiring has begun. Now execute.